Now, let's take some questions here in the room. I believe someone's going to come around with a microphone. If you have a question, raise your hand, and someone will get to you. And while Cameron's doing that, there are no questions, really? Anybody? Anything? If you were having lunch with the exec or with Dwight or with Matthias, what would you say? You know, I've always wanted to ask you X.
You wouldn't be on video then.
That's true, right? Keep it clean, people. Let's keep it clean. Well, while you're thinking of your questions, we did put out a request for a few, and I'll put those to you guys right now. So a senior investigator with the Department of Public Defense sent us one. He said, why can't funds be allocated for training investigators and staff on the front lines in Spanish to communicate with our clients and witnesses? I've seen Spanish classes offered downtown during the day, which is something HR is kind of making possible again, but that does no good for staff who have heavy caseloads or don't work anywhere near downtown.
Well, that's a good employee question / suggestion, I guess. When I came into office as executive, I signed an order around translation to executive order to have us push forward as resources were available to begin translating first the most essential and then as many as possible public documents into major languages that are spoken in King County. And both translation and interpretation are critical parts of what we do in one of the most diverse counties in the country. But also, you know, beyond those more formal mechanisms, just the ability to communicate with somebody in their primary language is important. And starting with, I think, making sure that our hiring pools for various jobs are reflective of the entire community. We have to make sure that HR and all of us are putting the effort into casting the net wide, not having artificial barriers to employment requirements that are not relevant to the job, so that we can have a genuinely diverse group of employees that's reflective of the people we're serving, and that will help with this. But also, during the bad times, training was just slashed horribly in order to be able to keep providing direct services, and it's been a long, painful process with these continuing deficits to rebuild that training capacity. HR is helping to provide this during the day. I'm going to go back and talk with them because I think this is a good employee suggestion about finding ways to provide more and provide it at times that employees who work during the day can still take advantage of it.
This is a question that also touches customer service and equity and social justice a lot. Matthias and I often get questions either from employees or community members about this same thing. There's a couple things that we usually recommend for people who are looking for translation or interpretation service. You want to touch on that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we have, and it's a great question. I mean, we have over 170 languages in our county. So providing training in one language is great, but then what about the other languages, right? So one of the things that your office and my office have been focusing on is how do we actually focus on language access in a way that everybody is able to have access to interpreters and translation regardless of the language, and this for all employees to have this. So we have expanded access to the language line as well. So and our teams go out and offer some of that training to all departments and programs. So that's a great resource. And even I did notice that this was in public defense, and there are some also kind of legal mandates in terms of in the legal field, also in the health field, and we actually have offices that focus on interpretation in, for example, Superior Court or in public health, because we do want to make sure that as part of providing good service and effective service, it needs to be right, especially in those, because the consequences of it not being right are extremely important. So we've also found for just our regular employees that you being able to make a quick call to the language line is a great way to be able to connect the customers and residents on a really quickly.
If anybody here or who watches this is wondering how that works, so say someone comes to your counter or calls into your office and speaks another language and is struggling to explain what it is they want, most people can tell you in English what language it is that they need. What you can then do is get set up to use the language line, which is a number you dial. You put the person on hold or tell them to wait a minute in your lobby, and you call the language line. It takes about 30 seconds to connect, and you say, I'm calling from King County. You get a code, which we can set up through your business business office so that they'll know who to bill. And they charge us, it's this great, we piggyback on a state contract for this. And so we get a great rate on interpreters, and they will find, like an Oromo interpreter, and they'll put them on the line, and you say, I'm with King County, I have a person here, they need help. And you hand the phone, or you conference line them in, and they speak to the interpreter in their language, and then the interpreter translates it back to you right in real time. And it's great, and then they just send you a bill for like $7 afterwards. So if you need to get set up on that, call my office, and we'll connect you with the person who does the trainings, and can connect you with the person to get it set up through your business office. It's a really great option. Any questions? Anybody think of one here in the room? No? There's one here, Cameron.
I was in the roads department. I was in the roads department for 26 years in maybe the golden years as compared to the dark ages they're in now. And I understand the structural problems created by the cap on property tax, on the revenue sources, on electric vehicles taken away from the gas tax and things like that, more fuel efficient cars. Where do you see this coming out of this doldrums? I mean, it pains me. I know what I'm looking at when I look at unincorporated roads, more so than anybody in this room. And the deferred maintenance cannot go on forever. Where's our way out, and when will that happen?
Well, thanks, Jake. There have actually been some pretty concerted efforts going on now to describe the problem and describe potential solutions. We just completed a roads and bridges task force that met in this very room that came up with a set of recommendations, including the observation that we need to create a regional funding source for roads that are fundamentally regional, whether they're inside or outside of cities, because the commuter trying to get to work doesn't care where the city boundary is, right? And neither does that person's tires. The other task force, which was a region-wide task force impaneled by the Puget Sound Regional Council, was the Transportation Futures Task Force, which also met in this room. And that group came out with its recommendations and, lo and behold, identified many of the same problems, but on a 4-county regional basis, and made a similar recommendation that our old way of raising funds and prioritizing projects no longer works for a metropolitan region that's really many millions of people across 4 counties, and we need new governance mechanisms from the state legislature and authorities so we can take a regional approach to beginning to deal with some of this backlog. Those are really the keys. I mean, you could never raise taxes on the remaining unincorporated residents enough to go back and repair what's already been degraded, to build what needs to be built. Our shortfall in roads is like $400 million a year or something. I mean, it's just astonishing. And so that is a regional scale problem, and it requires a regional scale solution. So those are all being presented to our state leaders, and also I think getting the word out to local leaders across central Puget Sound is going to be critical. So as I said before, we can all speak with one voice.
Any other questions here in the room? There's one here, it's coming around there, and then one up in the front after that.
I have a very similar question, but it's related to public health. I interact with public health on environmental health issues quite a bit, and I know they're constrained for funding, and I'm wondering about the long-term prognosis and how they get out of the hole they're in and what the plans are for moving forward there. Just very similar to the roads question.
So let me distinguish between two different parts of public health. So environmental health as a unit, as an organization, is funded almost entirely by fees. So they charge for plumbing inspection, they charge for food permits, those kind of things. So financially, they're fine. They're going to be okay. The traditional public health fund that is mostly supported by taxes and grants is where we have a problem. So that's our health clinics, it's immunizations, it's communicable diseases, it's tuberculosis, it's things like that. And the solution for them is going to have to be some kind of additional revenue source, either that's granted to us locally to impose, or the state stepping up to its responsibility to fund public health adequately. And that's what they said they would do in 2001, and they just haven't done it. So we really have kind of 3 legs of our state ask. One of them is the general fund, one is the roads fund, and one is the public health fund, because in all three cases, it's state-imposed limitations that are our problem.
Okay. There's another question here, this gentleman, and then this lady here. Oh,
No, okay, other way around that.
yeah. Well,
So my question is, hearing that we need the state legislature to be responsive to King County's needs if we're going to fix these problems, what are the roadblocks at the state legislature, and do our state legislators that represent the King County area understand our dilemma?
let me just say she is not a plant. We did not request this, but that's a great question. Go ahead.
Delicate issues. Let me see. I mean, I'll try to steer clear of just the, standard partisan speech, although there's a good element of that. I think that most of the King County delegation have been repeatedly schooled in what the challenges are here. And a good number of them are willing to do something about it, though they certainly don't constitute a majority in either house. There are others who just aren't hearing it, and then there are some who would really like to help, but the discipline within their caucus prevents them from stepping out with the kinds of solutions we need. Ultimately, it needs to be our 13,000 employees, our 2 million residents, saying that even if you, state, aren't wanting to make the investments you need to make to ensure continued health and prosperity, we in this region are willing to do that, and we need to, and simply give us the tools and authority to be able to succeed. We also pay how much? A very, very large percentage of state taxes out of this one county. So any investment that they allow us to make in our prosperity is something that's going to benefit every resident of the state of Washington.
Let me just add a couple of maybe slightly naive or optimistic notes to that. One is that last year I spent a lot of time in Olympia talking with legislators, and for the first time I had legislators of both parties, House and Senate, saying, okay, we get that you have a problem. We may not have understood that before, we may not have agreed with you before, but now we get that you have a problem. We can't help you right now, but we'll help you in 2 years, which would be 2017. So we'll see. So I think we've at least now gotten to the point where there's awareness and acceptance of the problem. The other thing is that, frankly, the executive and a lot of his colleagues around the state really worked together effectively as a group of counties. And we weren't always as unified about that. We had some counties say, no, everything's fine. Well, it's gotten to the point that no county is saying everything's fine. And so it's not just King County asking now, it's all the counties around the state. And if you spend any time out in some of the more rural counties, the service level is appalling. There are counties where there literally is no sheriff deputy on duty at night. I mean, that's astonishing in a country as rich as ours, in a state as rich as ours, that we are accepting of that level of service. So the fact that the counties are working together, I think, is another good sign.
And it's funny you mentioned the smaller counties. When I started into this several years ago, talking about this untenable situation, a lot of the commissioners from smaller counties would essentially say, we don't want to ask the legislature for this authority. We don't want this authority. We won't use this authority because that's the state's job. And we had already long ago come to the realization that the state was not going to be doing that job anymore, right? And they're now starting to dawn on them that the days of having the legislature step in and fund
Fix
all their
it.
basic services, they're over. And they're going to have to step up on their own.
Thanks for the question. This gentleman in the purple shirt here.
Hi, I had a question that kind of relates to some of the employee engagement survey results that we got. And one that resonated for my group was the questions around, do you have a reasonable workload that enables you to do your best job? And at least with my group, the answer was clearly no. And talking with my peers and other agencies, that's pretty common that everyone's feeling stressed and worked out. Wanted to find out, number one, how that issue is being addressed and what budgetary constraints or trade-offs are considered on, staffing increase requests.
That, that was probably my most negative answer when I filled out the survey, right? It's like, what? No. The fact is that a lot of that is a result of the need to cut over time while still trying to provide a high level of service to the people. And depending on the department you're in, clearly there's not going to be money to add a bunch of staff to be able to do the same body of work with more folks. What we need to do is to continue to identify ways we can do this body of work more efficiently so that we can make everybody's workload optimal and achieve that, that state where people are being their most productive. And by most productive, I don't mean just moving the maximum number of pieces of paper or electrons. I mean bring their whole selves to the job, have the time to think about how work could be done better, being able to maintain their health, arriving every day with a healthy attitude, all those kinds of things require us to make sure that people have a good, it's not, you know, work-life balance is something that's thrown around a lot, but it's even more than that. It's just a healthy work life. And I don't want anybody to be scrambling every day, unable to keep up, and going home feeling like they didn't succeed because they were simply given more work than their current way of working allows them to get done. Do you have anything to add on that other than there's not very much money?
Well, there's not very much money, but let me just elaborate on something you mentioned. We all, I think, have a tendency to just accept procedures that are in place. And one of the things in continuous improvement and lean is to have the employees who have to deal with all that stuff question those. Say, does it really have to be this way? And we've had more and more examples in the last couple of years where finally someone said, well, wait a minute, why is it done this way? And you eventually get to the point that no one knows. Well, it's always been done that way. And we found a lot of examples in things like procurement and accounts payable and that, whereby asking the question and discovering that there isn't a reason it is done that way, that you can come up with a way that's a lot more efficient and saves time for everybody who's involved in the process. And I'll just tell one story on my own office. We were actually in a meeting this morning, and we were talking about how a particular calculation is done. And my staff said, well, we don't know. We inherited this, and the person involved has been here for 20 years. We inherited this formula, and we just keep using it. And it clearly generates the wrong result. And so we're like, okay, so now it's time to go back and look at that, and they are looking at that. So that's a silly little example, but it's the kind of thing that as employees, if we question why it is done, we might be able to reduce some of this workload.
That, and I'll just add to that, that does have, it seems like we're not going to be able to do enough of that to really make an impactful difference on people's day-to-day work life. But time and time again, we've had people in like my customer service trainings or people I've talked with in meetings who say, we save so much time. I know in my office we were doing certain processes for processing customer inquiries. And it was taking us hours to do this cutting and pasting back between these databases. And KCIT built us this little solution that let it basically, not to get all technical, sucked it into the right boxes. And so it cut literally 7 to 8 hours a week from the 2 people who were doing that in our office. Over a week, and you add that over a year, that's a lot of time saved. So those are the types of things that we can do, and it really comes back to, are you kidding me? When I have to do something more than like 4 times, I'm like, there's got to be an easy button for this thing, like, come on. So more folks feeling empowered to ask that about processes, especially at the county where we know we're good at keeping things around for a long time, like processes, it will eventually start to have a real impact on our bottom line and on our quality of life, as you mentioned, because it's no fun to, in the day feeling like you've been on a hamster wheel all day and there's more to come the next day.
Unless it's part of healthy incentives.
That's true.
That's fine.
That is count. All right. One more question? Yeah. Oh, way in the back there.
I'm a bus rider, and I'm always surprised waiting for the bus every day, and on the bus I hear conversations from residents talking about government and how much the county must be making from all this ridership on the buses. It's amazing to me how residents of this county, and I assume other counties, don't understand how their government works, don't understand the funding structure and the problems with it. And I'm wondering, wouldn't it be a benefit to try to put out some informational pieces to help get people up to speed on the funding problems so they will call their legislators and hopefully support a change in the funding structure?
Yes.
Exactly.
It's a resource issue and it's a question of who the appropriate messenger is, but This is a problem, as we all know from watching the current political season across America. People have a fundamental lack of understanding of how government works, of the provision of services, of which of these things that they take for granted are a result of a collective decision to raise revenues and spend them in a targeted fashion. And it's frustrating. Sound Transit built in from the start money for marketing and for communicating with people. Metro Transit had to cut most of that in order to just keep the buses on the road. And I think you see that reflected in the numbers when you do research about people's perceptions of agencies. Sound Transit is like off the charts among governments, wildly popular. And I think a lot of it is those commercials with like the, lady with the white wig and all that stuff. And people explaining what it is Sound Transit does and how it improves your quality of life. And we need to be able to do that. We need to say what the challenges are and what these services are and how they are making your life more productive and improving your quality of life.
We're looking for ways to do more of that and to, this may not be okay to say, but to bypass the usual messengers because they don't find it interesting or sexy unless there's something negative.
No offense to our communication people.
Exactly. But, it's bad news stories are what's most interesting, or I used to be in news. If it bleeds, it leads, right, was the motto. The stuff that we're doing is not bleeding, it's not, bad stuff, and it's hard to get the news out about the good stuff that we're doing or just the basics of like how things work and what buckets money is in. I wish we did have more outlets that were willing to air that sort of thing, and we'll keep at it.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to wrap up. Thanks so much. If you still have questions, I just saw one hand shoot up, but we've got to wrap up. Will you email us, and we will get you an answer on that? And this show will be put online, so you can watch it again later if there was something we said that you're like, wait, what was that again? But I want to thank you all for joining us here in the room today, for your questions, and for just working for King County. I think it's a wonderful thing that we have the opportunity to do, and I thank you for doing it with me.
Thanks. Thank you.